All right, folks. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so other folks can continue to join as the webinar gets kicked off. So I want to just start out by thanking you all again for taking the time to be here. I know everybody has busy schedules and a busy day, and so just appreciate you carving out a little time today to talk about blockchain. So the title of the talk today is going to be why developers and entrepreneurs should be excited by blockchain. I am a developer. I'm a software engineer. I run a small consultancy, and I am very excited by blockchain. And I want to get through the hype and actually talk about why I think there is so much promise behind this technology. So a little bit about me, just real briefly. These are some places where you can find me on the internet. I just want to invite everyone to reach out to me, get in touch. Don't hesitate to shoot me an email or tag me on Twitter. I always love hearing from fellow developers, fellow entrepreneurs, and learning from everyone. So don't hesitate to reach out. As I kind of mentioned, I am a software engineer. I have been for my whole career. I have a background in traditional engineering, and I worked for a large aerospace company for a number of years, but doing stuff on the software side. And about 4 years ago, I decided to go independent and start a small software consultancy. That consultancy is called Scopelift, and we do a lot of mobile application development, but also some web and back-end work as well. Around the same time that I started my business, about 4 years ago, I also discovered this weird little project called Bitcoin. And I was immediately drawn to this at the time as an engineer, just because I found it so fascinating that someone had found this solution, and a very elegant solution actually, to the problem of digital scarcity. And so I kind of followed this project. Unfortunately, I didn't buy a whole bundle of them or mine a whole bunch of them. That would have been the really smart thing to do. But I did kind of pay attention to the project from that point forward, and to the kind of emerging crypto and blockchain scene that evolved as Bitcoin kind of gained more traction, but really within only a small kind of corner of the internet amongst nerds like me, primarily. And so it's been kind of a weird and exciting thing to see over the last year, but really mostly over just the last 6 to 9 months, I would say, how Bitcoin and blockchain has really entered the mainstream consciousness and become a topic that lots of people are talking about all of a sudden. And in fact, it's now come full circle where we have so much hype around this technology that it's actually a little bit difficult to kind of cut through the noise and actually find the signal of what's really going on. And so with that in mind, I am kind of starting a little experiment here, a new little project called Build Blockchain Tech. So you can visit www.buildblockchain.tech to kind of follow me along. And the basic idea is that, I have for years and want to continue learning about this technology, kind of getting down in the weeds, understanding what this new technology enables, what we can build as entrepreneurs and technologists with this technology. And if I'm going to be doing that, I think maybe it would also be great to kind of share what I learn out with the world, and in turn learn from the people that I connect with in doing so. So that's kind of my goal with the project here, and this webinar is kind of my way of kicking that off. And I again appreciate you all for taking the time out of your day to join me. So with Build Blockchain Tech, with that project, I want to kind of get really down in the weeds of the technology. But to kick things off here today, I kind of want to do the opposite, which is to step back and to really sort of get the 30,000-foot view. So my guess is that there's probably two groups of us in the audience today. There are probably some of us who are maybe a little bit more like myself, really down in the weeds of this, have been following it for a long time, checking coin market cap every 8 minutes to see the latest prices, following all the subreddits and everything, and really in the world of cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And then there's probably some of us who have heard about it maybe more recently, are intrigued by the technology and the potential, but are trying to understand where it really fits in and what's real and what's just hype. And so I think it's good for those of us in both camps to kind of step back and to gain this perspective and understand really how this technology, what the real potential of this technology is for all of us moving forward. And so I think that's the goal of the webinar today. But like I said, moving forward, I'm hoping with Build Blockchain Tech project to really get into the weeds, low level understanding how this stuff works. So this is kind of the opening salvo. So the way I'm going to approach this today is by making kind of a radical claim. And that's that you can divide the history of the world really into two eras, the before blockchain era and the after blockchain era. And that if you look at history this way, you can kind of think about what has changed in the world at the moment that blockchain came into existence. And so the question I want to ask then is, what is this fundamental change that was wrought by blockchain-based technology? When Bitcoin was invented, what really did that introduce into the world that was fundamentally new? But before I do that, if you'll humor me for just a second, I want to actually step back and do the same thing with a different technology that we're all familiar with, and that's the internet. Excuse me. So again, I want to just break kind of the history of the world up into two eras, the pre-internet era and the after-internet era. And I want to ask the question, how does one distribute content in these two different eras? So if you have something that you've written, let's just restrict the conversation for now to the written word. You've written some text. Maybe it's some research that you've done. Maybe it's some political commentary. Maybe it's a novel or some other work of fiction. Whatever it is, you want to share it with the world. Let's discuss how you would have gone about doing that in the pre-internet era. So even with the most advanced technology available at that time, you would have been limited to doing something along the lines of typing that up on a typewriter or a non-connected PC, and then taking that printout and maybe going to the local library and paying 10 cents or 5 cents a copy to produce a bunch of copies of that text. And then once you've done that, you could take a stack of physical papers and you could walk around, or you could drive around and you could hand them to people. Or maybe you could pay for the postage to actually deliver those to people in the mail. And the point here is that however you went about doing this, in the pre-internet era, if you had written words that you wanted to distribute out into the world, it was going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of time. And even if you invested as an individual that money and that time, the scale at which you were really going to be able to reach people with what you had created was pretty limited. You were maybe going to be able to reach hundreds or thousands of people as an individual doing something this way. So as a result, this is not something that people actually did in the pre-internet era. I don't think anyone, or certainly not many people, actually went this route. So instead, in the pre-internet era, if you actually had something that you wanted to say and that you wanted to get out in the world in the form of written text, what you might have actually done is gone to school and studied journalism and then gotten a job at a newspaper or a magazine. Or maybe you would have written a book and hired an agent and gone to try to convince a publisher to publish your book out into the world amongst the many thousands of manuscripts that they had to choose from each year. And so if you wanted to distribute your written text into the world pre-internet, you had to go through one of these intermediaries. And the reason that you did, there was actually a very good reason for this, and that's because they owned and controlled the physical machinery, the actual physical printing presses, and the distribution networks for getting printed words out into the world. So they paid this huge upfront cost of establishing this machinery and these networks. And by paying that cost, they were then able to distribute text at a scale that was economical, right? As an individual, you couldn't do this, but these big institutions could. And so they paid this cost to make economical distribution of knowledge possible. And that's good. That was and continues to be, to a certain extent, a very good thing. But when the internet came around, that changed, and it changed for the first time in history. So it suddenly became possible for one individual to simply type their words, their printed words, up on an internet-connected PC, publish that to the web, and then anyone on the other end with a piece of software, like a web browser, could receive and consume that written word. And this was something that was not possible before the internet and suddenly became possible with the internet. We took the equation of the costs to distribute text into the world, and where there had previously been these big fixed upfront costs, we put a bunch of zeros. And where there had previously been a long period of time that it would take to distribute text, we put, again, a zero. It became instantaneous. And so this wrought a huge change on the world. Now, certainly it didn't actually happen the way that I'm presenting it. It wasn't instantaneous. When the internet was originally developed, it was a very small network, just 5 nodes at a handful of universities. And it had to grow, it had to be built out. People had to get PCs. We had to have companies like AOL providing dial-up internet to all the households in the world and in our country and world. We had to build out cellular networks and broadband networks and put a smartphone in everyone's pocket. And so this transition has taken a very long time. And I think you can argue we're still actually going through that transition, right? We're still figuring out what it means when any one person can communicate with any one other person, can publish whatever they want in a permissionless way up to the web, and that can be consumed by anyone else. I think you could argue, for example, the current political climate that we're in, right, is at least partially to do with this new capability that we gained as humans. So really, this technology was invented, and then we've spent the last 20 to 30 years really distributing that technology and figuring out what it means as a society that this has changed. And we're still in the process of doing that. So now, just to summarize, the internet enabled humans to disseminate knowledge and content without the aid of a dedicated third party to absorb that upfront cost for the distribution. And this was a fundamental change. So back to the topic at hand then, what does all of this have to do with blockchain? Well, again, I want to divide the world into these 2 eras, the pre-blockchain era and the post-blockchain era. And I want to ask a similar question here, and that is, how does one transact collaboratively with others? And when I say transact collaboratively, what I roughly mean is kind of engaging in commerce, although I think that's a little bit too limited. Humans, we seem to have this innate desire and ability to engage in transactions with one another where both parties walk away feeling as if they've gained something, right? So the prehistoric example, of course, is the idea of barter, right? So I have a piece of meat, you have a fish. We come to some agreement on a fair exchange for those 2 things, and both of us walk away feeling as if we've gained. And we've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years as a species. And after barter, we kind of moved into more advanced forms of this kind of collaborative transactions, right? So first we had prehistoric forms of money like beads and shells. Then we moved on to things like precious metals, and then actual currencies that were backed by precious metals held by governments. More recently, we have this idea of fiat currency. So it's a currency that's not actually backed by anything except for the power of the government, the decree of the government that says it's worth something. So you now have the government in play issuing the fiat currency. You have a central bank that controls the monetary policy behind that fiat currency. You also, of course, have just traditional private banks that offer a whole host of services like credit and savings and interest and loans and all these sorts of additional innovations that we've added on top of this basic idea of collaborative transaction. And then our transactions also get more complicated, right? So we add things like contracts that have clauses and conditions. So we have a whole judicial system, a civil judicial system for enforcing these contracts. We have judges and lawyers to write these things up and to interpret them. So we have this whole network of third parties that we've built up over time to allow us to transact collaboratively with one another at a larger and more productive scale. And what's happened now in the after blockchain world is similar in a way to what happened with the invention of the internet, which is that for the first time, individuals can transact collaboratively with one another using simply a piece of software on a connected PC or smartphone. So you have your PC, you have some kind of wallet software, or maybe a smart contract that's has some front end attached to it, and you can now collaborate with one another. You can transact in this way for the first time without an intermediary. So again, to review, blockchain enables humans to transact collaboratively without the aid of a trusted third party to execute and verify that activity. And this is the first time this has been possible in history once you get beyond that very initial stage of kind of hunter-gatherer bartering at the lowest level, right? So this is, in my opinion, why blockchain is such a big deal. It's given us this fundamental new capability as a species in the same way that the internet did. And I think we're just at the very, very, very beginning of understanding what that really is going to mean for civilization. So let's get a little bit more concrete about this, because that sounds kind of a little bit pie in the sky, maybe a little wishy-washy, like you might understand that in theory, but what does this actually mean? And what I want to do is just kind of look at transactions that occur today in the world today along two sets of axes. So there are lots of ways that you could look at this. This is just kind of one way to slice it. And on the left-hand side, I want to talk about the scale of the transaction. This isn't just the monetary value, right? It's scale in a broader sense. So McDonald's, for example, they sell $1 hamburgers, but they sell literally billions of them around the world every year. So that's operating at a huge scale. And then on the bottom axis here, I have the region at which this transaction is occurring, whether it's local, domestic within a given country, or international. And so I want to look along these axes at what kind of transactions exist in the world today and which ones don't and why not. So small local transactions, these are things that happen primarily between friends and family. They're primarily carried out with cash, although maybe more recently you might use something like PayPal or Venmo. And they're enforced almost completely by kind of social norms and mutual trust between the individuals who are involved in the transaction, right? So we go out to dinner or lunch and I spot you that lunch, or I lend you 20 bucks and I know that you're going to pay me that $20 back, or that you're going to pick up the tab next time because, you know, we trust each other. We both just want to be good people. And there are lots of kind of norms that push us towards making sure things are equitable in that way, right? And neither of us is going to take the other to court if we don't live up to that expectation, because the scale of the transaction is just too small to make it worth doing something like that, to try to enforce it in any way. Now, if you get above that and you have medium-sized transactions, these are occurring both locally and domestically, and you're talking about now small and medium-sized businesses. So this can be something as small as my small consultancy that I run, all the way up to, you know, fairly large domestic companies. And, you know, these companies will use things like credit cards. We have regional banking that we'll use. We'll draw up contracts and enter into agreements with other individuals and businesses to carry things out. We'll pay lawyers to execute those contracts. And if something goes wrong, then we have recourse to the court system to have these things enforced, right? And so the small, medium business world operates locally and domestically, but when you start talking about the scale of international scale, probably small and medium businesses aren't living in that world, right? As a consultant, I would probably never hire a contractor in a foreign country, not because I wouldn't want to, but simply because if I did, I would have very little confidence that I could ever enforce that contract if something were to go awry, right? Enforcing that across borders is too much. Paying lawyers to draw something up across borders, there's too much overhead. It's not an economical transaction for a small company like mine. So it just doesn't happen. Where it does happen, of course, is with large multinational corporations and governments. So these kinds of entities are operating with international banks, with very complex accounting practices. They use things like trade agreements and international law to enforce things. And so these are the kinds of transactions where you have international, multinational scale, right? And you have to get up to that level before it becomes worth it, because if you do have, say, a dispute between two companies, one based in China, one based in the United States, that becomes very difficult to litigate and enforce in any way. In fact, you probably have to get governments involved, and it's very difficult, right? So these are the kind of transactions that we have in today's world. And then over here, you have this whole block of transactions that simply don't occur because the scale and the reach at which they're occurring makes them kind of not economical for some of the reasons that we were touching on. So let's look at this now and say, where does blockchain change this world? Well, first of all, down here at this bottom row, you have tiny transactions. And when I say tiny, I'm talking about literally pennies or even fractions of a pennies, microtransactions, as they've been referred to. These don't really exist in the world today, and that's because they're not really economical at any scale. But with the introduction of new projects, things like Filecoin and Basic Attention Token, or BAT, as a couple of early examples, we could have transactions that are being executed for us automatically by software, where the exchanged value in any given transaction is at the scale of pennies or fractions of the penny, right? So Filecoin is a project, for example, that allows you to, it's not launched yet, but it's being developed by some very credible developers. So I think we will see it launch. it allows you to store your data in the cloud, but the cloud in this case is just other people's hard drives. So I have some spare hard drive space. I load some software that rents that space out to other people on the internet. They store their data on my hard drive, shards of data which are encrypted, and I'm compensated by them automatically via software over time in this Filecoin token, right? So another example is Basic Attention Token, BAT. So this is being developed by Brendan Eich, who is the developer of JavaScript, one of the early employees at Netscape. His company Brave develops the Brave browser, which is actually my primary browser now day to day. I use Brave, and this is a working project, right? So when you browse with Brave, websites can register with Brave, and the software will automatically track how much time I spend on each website, and will pay those websites out in tokens, small increments based on how much attention I've given each site, right? So again, automatic, very small transactions being executed at this very low level through a cryptocurrency-backed project in software. So this is fascinating in that we can do this for the first time. And again, it's completely borderless. It doesn't matter, for example, if the website that I'm reading is based in China or India or in my backyard, right? If I'm spending time on that website, they're going to be paid out in BAT and in these tiny fractions of pennies. So it's borderless, and it's these microtransactions. Up here, this whole other corner, we have smart contracts, right? So I mentioned earlier, as a small business, I might be hesitant to hire someone working in a foreign country to work on one of my projects. Say we wanted to collaborate for a shared client. Well, today with a smart contract, that is some code that executes in a secure, auditable manner on the blockchain that's enforced by cryptography, we could write a smart contract that would be less than a few lines of code. We could publish that on, say, the Ethereum blockchain. We could use that address as our shared payment address, and the smart contract could be programmed to automatically split any funds that were paid by our client between the two of us. So that enables us to collaborate even if we don't really know each other or trust each other that well, and even if we have no confidence in the ability of the legal system between our two countries to enforce any kind of contract, right? And so I think the point here in reviewing all of this is just to point out that even if blockchain technology doesn't affect any of the existing transactions, any of the ways that we collaborate today, at the very least, at the bare minimum, it unlocks a whole host of new kinds of transactions that previously just haven't been possible. All right, so let's kind of step back and review, and then I'll take a few questions at the end. To really summarize things, I think that communication and collaboration, these are two of the things that humans do that really set us apart from the other species that exist on planet Earth, right? And in particular, it's not just that we communicate and that we collaborate, but it's the fact that we find and develop technologies that allow us to scale the way we do these things, right? So you can think of language, of the written word. You can think of the printing press, of radio and television and the internet itself. You can think of money as a technology that allows us to scale how we collaborate, right? You can think of credit and double entry bookkeeping and all the advanced financial instruments and contracts and legal frameworks that we've developed. They allow us to scale the way we collaborate. And so the most important technologies are those that do this, that help us to kind of scale our collaboration and our communication in new ways. And I think blockchain is a technology that does this. It fundamentally changes our ability to collaborate transactionally. It allows us to do it in new ways and at a new scale that hasn't previously been possible. And so one way or another, I think this technology is going to be very important. So just like the internet, blockchain technology is going to bring about a great change in the world. Much of that change, I think, will be good, but some of it will be disruptive. And I mean that in the literal sense of the word disruptive, right? Like people's lives, people's professions, what they do are going to be disrupted by this technology. So I think as technologists and entrepreneurs, we have the privilege of being at the forefront of this change, of being involved in it at a deep, fundamental level, of getting to actually build this new world that we might be entering into. And I think that's exciting. I'm excited about it. I don't know if you can tell. But I think we should also embrace that role with some wisdom as well, you know, enthusiastically, but with wisdom, learning from the past, learning from the lessons that we've maybe seen as the internet has played out and how that technology has changed the world. So we should proceed enthusiastically, but with some caution about this exciting new technology. So that's all I have. Again, here are some places where you can find me on the internet. I am, like I said, always happy to connect with folks. And so please don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch. I really hope that you'll kind of join me on this journey to go deep into blockchain technology. If you check out the buildblockchain.tech website, you can sign up for the newsletter. You can follow me on Twitter. And I hope that for my fellow developers and technologists that I can provide resources that will be useful in learning moving forward. So that's all that I have. Again, I appreciate your time today. I'm still learning this webinar platform, but I am happy to take questions if you'd like. Anybody has questions that they want to throw in the chat, please don't hesitate to do so, and I'll do my best to answer them. If not, we can wrap things up. Thanks, Lydia. I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming out. You bet, Ernesto. Thank you. So, I'll give a couple more minutes here for questions in case anybody thinks of something, but I do want to mention, I believe this platform is going to record this and make it available for everybody post, once we're done here. So I think you'll get an automated email with the recording if you wanted to share it with anyone who you might, who might find this interesting. I would appreciate that. Yeah. And like I said, please don't hesitate to follow me, reach out to me, get in touch. All right, well, give it a few more seconds here. Going once. Any questions? Going twice. Oh, something popped up here. Let's see. Oh, so Lalit Jagtap, I hope I pronounced that right, Lalit. He asked, can you provide some overview of what you will be covering as part of your blockchain journey? So great question. That is actually something I'm hoping to lean on you all for. And I want to get a sense of what people are looking for. So as I mentioned, I'm a developer. I've been playing with, for example, smart contract development in Ethereum for quite some time. I've also been diving into things like Bitcoin internals. I've been reading a whole bunch of white papers and trying to learn about alternate cryptocurrencies and blockchain solutions to see how valid some of those are and if they're introducing new technologies. So I'm really, I'm looking to kind of take some feedback from you all, and you guys can reach out to me to provide that feedback. I also may bug you with an email poll after this webinar ends to get a better sense of what folks might be looking for. So Armard asked in the chat, can you talk about any experience you've had with Solidity? So Solidity, if some of you might be familiar with it, is a programming language that allows you to write code that runs on the Ethereum blockchain. So Ethereum is the second most popular cryptocurrency behind Bitcoin, at least by market cap and transaction volume. Solidity allows you to write. So what's different about Ethereum to Bitcoin is that Ethereum has what's called a Turing complete programming language built into it. So you can write these things called smart contracts. You write code, you deploy that code on the blockchain. And once that code is deployed, not even the person who wrote it can change what it will do or how it will execute, right? It's enforced by the blockchain. So a smart contract developed in Solidity allows you to write something like I mentioned before. You could very easily, a very simple use case would be a smart contract that allowed you to set up a shared address between two or more people and that split the funds between those addresses. You can also do much more advanced things. So there's all kinds of voting systems that people have developed, prediction markets. So it really, there's a whole new world of what people are now referring to as distributed apps or dApps. Sometimes people say dApps. Distributed applications that run on the blockchain. My personal experience with Solidity as a programming language is that it's a fairly simple technology to learn in terms of if you're already a developer, you'll probably be able to pick up Solidity pretty quickly. The problem, I think, is that it actually requires a whole new mental model in how you're approaching the development of your code and the deployment of your code, right? So unlike a traditional app or a website where if you write a bug, you can just go back and change that code immediately, with Solidity code, once you've deployed it on the mainnet, on the real blockchain, it's deployed and you can't change that code at all. And it's going to do whatever you programmed it to do. And there have been some really high profile examples of Solidity code that had a bug or that had a security flaw that was taken advantage of. And people have really lost a lot of money, in some cases other people's money, through a service that they were providing. So I think we're kind of just at the beginning of understanding how what the best practices are around things like smart contracts are. That said, I find writing Solidity and DApps very exciting, and I've enjoyed learning it. And I have a couple of things in the works that I'm hoping to deploy to the mainnet soon. Simple things, but interesting nonetheless. So that's kind of a summary of Solidity. I think that's definitely something I'll be covering with the Build Blockchain Tech website. So another question from Lalit: similar to BAT, or Basic Attention Token, is there any solution being developed using smart contracts to hire developers in other countries? That's a great question. I'm almost certain that things like that do exist. In fact, I know I've stumbled across different kind of blockchain-based solutions for hiring developers and freelancers of any kind. There's also, so I can't think of any of those off the top of my head, but I know that things like that do exist. There's also an interesting project called Gitcoin. So Gitcoin. And what that does is it allows you to set up bounties in Ether or any other ERC20 token running on Ethereum for completing work, open source work from GitHub. So you post an issue to GitHub, and then using Gitcoin, you attach a bounty of a certain amount for whoever completes that issue, and then the network will automatically pay that out. Excuse me. Once you've verified that the work has been completed and accepted, for example, their pull request completing that issue. So Gitcoin is kind of a different model on it, where it's not hiring someone on an hourly rate or something like that, but actually paying people to complete tasks on open source projects directly. So those are a couple of things that I've heard of. I'm sure there are lots of other interesting projects out there. All right, any other questions before we wrap things up? All right, folks. Well, thank you again for your time. I really do appreciate it. I hope that you will reach out to me and give me any feedback that you have, positive and negative, and any kind of information that you would like to see covered in future webinars, in resources, blog posts, email courses, all these sorts of things. These are the things that I'm hoping to explore, and I really, really appreciate you joining me. So thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day.